That is the cry of a church that wants to die. That's not the way we do it here.
If a pastor hasn't considered quitting at a church, then I wonder, is he really preaching the gospel?
Do we have to disclose identities in this podcast?
We don't have to.
Oh.
Relationship is never built in rows. So in the auditorium, it's set not to build relationship.
Right.
Relationship is built around the table.
Yeah.
I said, well, our church, and before I even finished, he collapsed on the ground sobbing. And I said, what's going on? And he said, I have a gun over there. And I was about to kill myself. And I was sitting here praying, God, if there's another way, send me a sign. And so I sat there with this man for quite a while until his family and stuff got there. And he just kept saying, he heard me. He answered me.
Frankly, we've got a lot of lukewarm people in our churches.
You can't be a follower of Jesus Christ and say, I know what you said, Jesus, but I prefer to believe, but that's kind of where we are.
Yeah.
I mean, I beg God to take the desire to pastor away.
One of my favorite Hendricks quotes, Howard Hendricks, is, not Jimmy, you can impress somebody at a distance, but you can only impact them up close.
God can handle the big questions.
Hi, I'm Chris McNeil, and this is Ministry on the Move, a journey podcast interviewing pastors and ministers across the country. As the father of the McNeils, I get to travel all across this land singing the gospel, and one day it dawned on me that I was already having great conversations with pastors. And then came the conviction that maybe I should hit the record button and share these inspiring, insightful, and hopeful conversations with you. Join me on a journey to churches of all shapes and sizes, different parts of the country, and see just what it takes to shepherd the body of Christ. For more information on the McNeils, you can visit us at mcneilmusic.tv or mcneilmusic.com, or follow us on Facebook at The McNeils with 2 L's. Thanks for joining us, and here's the show. Well, hey everybody, this is Chris, Ministry on the Move. This is our 30th episode. It's hard to believe that I've been doing this now for 30 weeks and having a really good time. This has been cathartic for me, and I hope that those of you that are listening enjoy it. Would love to hear from more of you. You can find us on Facebook at The McNeils, YouTube at The McNeils. You can write me at chris@mcneilmusic.com. We just released our 8th album. It's called I Am Convinced. And last Sunday we did a homecoming 10-year anniversary and new album release party at First Baptist Church in Garland, Texas, and had such a blast. It was a great evening, and really looking forward to showcasing this album. Songs that we've written, 11 of the 14 songs we wrote, and just reflective of the last year and a half. Actually COVID and since, so many things have changed in our world, and I think our writing reflects it. Our son, who was in the ministry with us for 7 years, joined the military, stepped down off of the road, our oldest son, and so the next wave has kind of come in and really grown roots. They have improved the sound, the musicianship, and just been amazing. So this has been a lot of fun. This next episode that I'm fixing to introduce is one when we were back in Commanche, Texas, about 6 weeks ago. This is my interview with Stephen Schulte. All right, this is Chris McNeil with Ministry on the Move. I'm going to quit I'm going to quit counting episodes because I have learned that I'm really bad at doing it on the fly. And until I get back to the house and edit this thing and figure out how many episodes we've really got here, it's just no good. And so I apologize for not knowing what episode I'm on. However, the McNeils are back at Eastside Baptist Church in Commanche, Texas. Steve Schulte. I even messed it up.
That's
See?
all right.
Yeah, Steve Schulte is the pastor. This is our second time to be here, Steve. Thank you for having us back. You had us last year when Kaylee was kind of on maternity leave. This is the only church where Kaylee has not been with us, not sung in the church. So tomorrow we're going to remedy that. I'm very much looking forward to it. So
Amen.
thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for agreeing to embarrass yourself here with me.
Absolutely glad to do it.
Yeah. So tell me, how long have you been here at this church?
I have been at Eastside right at 15 years.
Wow. Now, I think I told you this last year, but I thought when I first met you that you were probably like 30, and as it turns out, I think you may be older than me.
I'm not sure about that. I'm 60 in November.
I'll be 58 in April.
Yeah.
So
I get that a lot.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I grew a little bit of whiskers.
show the wisdom off.
When the whiskers weren't there, it was worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you've been here 15 years.
15 years.
How long have you been in the pastorate?
I've been in the pastorate 23 years. My first church was First Baptist Church in Wortham, and I was there 8 years.
So that means you were not fresh out of college or high school when you got your first church. How old were you?
Right. Oh man, I'd have to calculate it back there. I graduated from seminary in 94, and I went to Second Baptist Bridge City as a youth and education minister. That was my first position. And always felt like I would be a youth minister till I was 60 and retired.
Right.
Loved youth ministry and really enjoyed my time at Second. But while I was there, things in the church and some things that happened in my personal ability to do youth ministry, which your wife and I were just talking about. After I was there 6 years, we had an interim pastor, Dr. Ronnie Burke, and he is the one that pretty well said, I think you're called into the pastorate. Mm-hmm. And we started praying about that, and he encouraged me, and he just said, you're already doing it. He was our interim. He was coming over to preach from Sulphur, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And he said, you're doing all the pastoral ministry and most of the administration, and when you do preach, you're doing a good job. He said, I really feel like, you're being led into the pastorate. And so after that, that kind of got me thinking about it and praying about it, and ended up going and taking a church as a pastor. And
did it excite you or terrify you or both?
Both. It's a lot more responsibility. Mm-hmm. The thing about the pastorate is it probably more than almost any other avenue of leadership, the buck stops at the pastor. Mm-hmm. So, that's, kind of like, now what do I do?
Right. Yeah.
So you learn, you better be relying on the Lord to lead you and the Holy Spirit to guide you.
Which you would think you would have done prior to coming into the ministry, and yet, I don't know why I love to pick on this statistic, but Barna said that I think and I'll correct myself from the other times that I've quoted. That 83.2% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
Yeah,
so,
that's a surprise.
Yeah, but I think that 47% of all pastors since COVID have reconsidered their calling. And many of them have vacated
Yes.
the office. So
Yep.
so I think it's a fair thing to say, you have to be sure, or you really want to be sure. You're going to be frustrated if you're not certain
Yes.
of your calling.
I think what COVID did is amplified what was already happening. Because, we have a Baptist college right here in Brownwood, about 30 miles away. Matter of fact, our worship and technology guy is the technology guy for Howard Payne University in Brownwood. And it's really kind of sad how few students they have in the Christian Studies department.
Really?
They have really had to make up in all the other areas because they have lost so many. They just nobody's doing it anymore.
Did I catch you? Did I understand you right? You said post-COVID?
I think it was already happening, and then it is amplified since COVID, yes. And I know around in this area anyways, especially the smaller churches are really struggling to find pastors.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, really struggling. And part of it is, I think, for so long, that idea of a pastor was going to come in and he's going, we don't have to pay him. A lot of the smaller churches back in the 90s all got rid of their parsonages. That was kind of a movement.
Right.
And it is they're paying for it now big time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me why, because,
Well, they can't pay enough to get a young guy with 2 kids.
And now on top of that, he's still got to take care of his own home.
And when I was in seminary, and I went to Southwestern in Fort Worth and graduated in 94, the church I was at North Cleburne Baptist Church. They had 2 parsonages. They had one for the pastor and one for the youth pastor, which was right on the grounds. And, they didn't really pay me anything, but I had a place to live.
Right.
And my wife had just got her teaching certificate, so she was able to teach. So we were able to make it.
Right.
Well, if you didn't have a house, you're living in poverty.
Right.
Under
a bridge and pastoring a church.
And for a long time, I have known pastors that after it's really hard for people to understand this, that when they get out of the ministry, when they finally do retire, I know pastors that live in housing authority.
Right.
Because they have basically spent everything they've made and just weren't, and it's not because they were living lavishly by any means.
It means that they were living from paycheck to paycheck already.
Yes.
I worked. I never thought about bringing this up on this podcast, but it's a valuable data point. For 5 years, I worked for the annuity board of the Southern Baptist Convention, Guidestone, I think they call it now, or Lifestone. Is it Guidestone? I worked there from 95 to 2000. And 1 year, I think it was in 2000, went to the Southern Baptist Convention in Orlando, Florida, and had to help. I was doing IT work at the time and was so set up the computer network and everything there at the convention. But then, hey, you're already here. Go ahead and help these people. And when the ministers come up, and you can tell them, you can answer their questions like an IT guy is a financial planner, but they were short on people, and I could log into the system and show them this is how much you've got in your life savings. It broke my heart.
Right.
There were widows that were 92 coming to check in on their $12,000 that they had in savings. There were married couples that were 68 and they had $80,000 in savings. And I'm sitting here looking at it and thinking, we've done something wrong.
Right.
Terribly, terribly wrong, that we are the ones who have, for all intents and purposes, laid down their life for the ministry, for their entirety of their working career. And now we're going to kick them out of the parsonage because we have to have a place to put the new pastor. And I hope you saved more than $80,000 because you're going to be living for another 10 years. And, well, good luck.
Right. Yes. I have seen that and known some very good men that was the situation they were in. And especially if the man dies and leaves the wife behind, It can be, because for a long time, pastors' wives didn't work.
Right.
They were expected not to work.
That's exactly right.
So
if they did anything, it was probably play the piano in the church.
yes. Yeah. Which paid $15 a week, maybe.
Yeah. I thought you were just 15 cents.
Well, might have been.
No, you're so how do we fix that?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't pretend to. I think it's going to be very hard now because of, the conventions contracting, the state conventions are contracting. There's been so much fighting and bickering, and most of the smaller churches around here are not involved in the state convention, national convention, any of it. I mean, they're probably Southern Baptist in name only.
Right.
They may still send some to Lottie Moon or something like that, but
Right.
just very disconnected. I see a time, and we've talked about it actually in our deacons meeting here, that, we could see a time where, a pastor of a church our size might actually preach at one of the smaller churches, kind of like the Methodists already do. They may do two churches,
Yep.
a mid-sized one,
Yep.
and then a smaller one in a nearby community. Honestly, that's probably what they should be doing or working towards already. Of course, you got to get everybody on board, the bigger church, the smaller church, the whole thing. And then with that, part of that is going to be re-educating the people to take a bigger part in the actual hands-on, especially hospital ministry, sick visitation, and those kinds of things. Because if a pastor can stretch too thin on that pretty quickly, and if you don't have church members picking up the slack and everything, the ball gets dropped.
Right.
So.
I think one of the things that I have appreciated most about the historical Methodist Church is how they would move a pastor around, and not. I didn't think at the time that I was in favor of that, but then what it taught me is that the church learned that the church is not the pastor.
Yes.
And that there are responsibilities and duties to be taken regardless of who's in the pulpit.
Yes.
Obligations.
There's good and bad
Sure, you're right.
About both ways.
That's right.
I've thought about that quite a bit and have some pretty good friends. Actually, have a fairly good friend that was pastoring in the last town I was at. Now he's pastoring in Brownwood. That's a Methodist pastor. He went to Baylor, by the way. And but there's some very good things about the way they do their pastors. And I know, in some ways they take care of them better. I think especially the ones that are in smaller congregations. Mm-hmm. I really think the future is more bivocational ministry. I really do think that. I think you're going to see more pastors that need to be or should be or maybe have to be in a bivocational position. And if you do that, once again, the people of the church have to be re-educated that, our pastor can't drop everything and go visit somebody in the hospital, or somebody else has to be able to go do some of that. So
do you think, in your opinion, is that direction of bivocation? So we've been in churches of all shapes and sizes, and I don't know. I would probably say that right now, out of the churches that we've been in, it's somewhere bivocational, probably somewhere between 1/3 and 50% of the pastors are bivocational. Do you see that as a good thing? Paul was bivocational.
I have absolutely no problem with that.
Right.
Some of the best pastors I know are bivocational pastors.
No, that's absolutely right. And I don't mean to disparage it. My question is a little bit more pointed towards, let's talk about persecution in the church or the church being marginalized in America, and thinking, is this the Church of Jesus Christ preparing to go underground, or is this the Church of Jesus Christ preparing to die in some places in America? Or is it both?
I think it's both. Yeah, I would definitely say it's both. We talk about that quite a bit in our deacons meeting as well, that I say this myself personally to quite a few people. I really envy the guys that got to pastor churches in the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Sure.
The legal issues that I have to deal with, even in youth ministry. I'll tell our youth minister, even when I was doing that in the 90s in Bridge City, I was in Bridge City from 94 to 2001. You got a permission slip and took your kids to camp or Six Flags or whatever. Now you almost have to take a file cabinet with paperwork in there.
And a lawyer.
And have my son, when he went his senior year, he turned 18 in June, and we went to camp a few weeks later. He had to pass the child sexual abuse training thing.
Right.
And that's what I mean. It's wedding policies.
Right.
A few years ago, took my whole church. We walked through this. We changed our entire wedding policies. I do not do civil ceremonies anymore. I will not sign a state license. So I still do weddings, but I have to make sure up front everybody understands it's basically a spiritual
blessing.
Yeah. It's like a baptism.
Right.
And then you go down to the courthouse and get what they call a declaration of marriage. And just, you're married. And it's actually cheaper that way.
Right.
But for me, and I know here in Commanche, our Justice of the Peace does no marriages. Because if he does, he has to do all marriages, no matter what the situation is. And even though in Texas right now, I might win a lawsuit if that happened.
It's not worth the time.
You're tied up for 3 years in court. And I'm not willing to do that. So I'm just like, I'm not going to do that.
When I started realizing the way the winds were blowing, I started doing the study, and I realized very quickly that I don't need the state's blessing. That's a financial thing.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that I want it or don't want it. That's its own distinct discussion.
Yeah.
Well, and there's nowhere in the Bible that I can find, even where a pastor or a rabbi was required.
Right.
It was two dads.
Yeah.
Best I could tell.
Yeah.
Certainly in the Old Testament.
Yeah. Baptist traditionally, and this is something that we have totally lost, were at the forefront of the separation of church and state.
Oh,
and
wow.
Most
in America.
Yeah.
Roger Williams, Connecticut, and all that. Right, right.
Isaac Backus, all those.
Yeah.
I mean, they were abused for standing up for the idea that there should not be any state-sponsored religion, period.
Right.
And we've crossed that, and we mix and mingle with it. And I initially loved being able to say, on behalf of the great state of Texas, I now pronounce you man and wife, in my cowboy boots and all that.
And your buckle.
But later I realized that I'm acting on behalf of the state.
Yes, sir.
And so when I gave it up, it was a little bit of a struggle, but I realized, really the state can do whatever it wants to. It doesn't affect me.
And will.
That's exactly right. And we're blessed now to be in Texas,
That's right.
but what in 20
What about
years? And that's
tomorrow?
the thing. The things are changing so quickly. And that's what you and I think we're on the same page with.
Yep.
Everything is changing so quickly that, and that's what we try to talk about that in our deacons meeting. We can't, if you keep doing church like you've been doing church in the last 30 years, you're going to get sucked in and go down the tubes probably pretty quickly, because you can't just keep doing. I mean, it was so easy in a lot of ways. That's why I was saying,
Right.
boy, I'd love to have been a pastor back.
Right.
I had my mentor, one of my mentors, when I was in Cleburne going to seminary, the lady that was treasurer, and that was the first church I was on staff, is North Cleburne. The lady that was treasurer there, her daddy had pastored that church. And when he pastored it, he accepted Christ in the oil field. I think he was 38 years old.
Wow.
Became a pastor. Everywhere he went, the churches grew. I mean, like wildfire type growth. This was back in the 70s, late 60s, 70s. And her brother was a pastor. And Kenny Coleman, he pastored First Baptist Godly. Love him to death. He was one of my kind of mentors. And I try to model my ministry a little after him. I think he's retired now. But I asked his sister one time, she was our treasurer, what made your daddy so successful as a pastor? And she said he did two things. He studied the Word and he visited people. And he left everything else up to the men of the church to run.
Wow.
Well, and I look at that and I think, you know what? That's pretty smart.
Yep.
You know, now there's a lot of people that say the opposite of that. The pastor's the ruler of the church. You ought to have your hands in everything. Da, 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 da. Probably the bigger church, the more they're like that, I guess. But I am more of a hands-off guy like that, where I say, you know what? The problem is today, I mean, you're constantly getting stuff where right now insurance is a big problem. All the churches are being dropped, or our insurance went up $10,000 last year.
Wow.
That's a huge chunk in a church budget.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So the struggle is, I mean, I don't even like messing with all that stuff,
Right.
but I have to.
Yep.
You know, and I try to let as much go to the guy. We've got some really good people in our church, and I just let them have that stuff and try not to be as involved in all that, because I can't.
Right.
I mean, I could literally be up here every day, all day
sure.
long. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thankless job of being a pastor, right? You're the janitor, you're the youth minister when he doesn't show up, you're the Sunday school teacher backup, you're the preacher, you bury people, you marry people, you go to the hospital, you do premarital counseling. And oh, by the way, you better have the best marriage and children in the entire church,
Yeah.
right? Because you're the guy.
Well, the family part is it's a difficult thing. Always felt pretty good about it. We had 4 kids. They're almost all out. My youngest is a senior at North Texas in Denton, and hopefully she's graduated in May. She's just about out. The rest of them are all out. They're all paying their own bills. But one day, this is a couple years ago, we were all sitting around at Thanksgiving or something, and they were talking about church and growing up and being preachers' kids and all that. And I said, well, it wasn't really all that bad, was it? And I'll never forget this. My oldest said, Dad, you really don't know. And I was like, uh-oh, what do you mean? And I said, y'all had friends and she said, yeah, but she said, didn't you ever wonder why we were always at home? And I said, well, yeah, a little bit. I mean, I guess so. And she goes, it's not that we wanted to go to the parties or go do whatever. She said, but it would have just been nice to have been asked.
Oh, wow.
So Dad got a little lesson there.
Right.
Yeah, it's different, even though it looks really good. Or you
Right.
think, because my kids were, when we moved to Commanche, that was a good thing. It turned out all 4 of my kids graduated from Commanche. My oldest was a drum major 2 years. All my kids were pretty good in athletics, which helps a lot.
Right. Sure.
But even so, just knowing, okay, there was those struggles of just fitting in and
Sure.
being accepted and all those kinds of
Everybody
things.
looks at you sideways because you're a PK.
Yeah.
You're going to tattle.
Yep. You
You're
might
goody
tell or
two-shoes.
say something. Yep.
Yeah.
So,
How do you, let me ask you a sideways question. In the midst of all of the things that you've got to, I guess, in air quotes, care about, the finances of the church, the legal, how do you keep in focus the real reason that you became a pastor? Because it certainly wasn't to mop and paint and pick up crickets.
oh, you saw that, huh? Well, part of it is actually, I kind of was. I'm a servant. When I was a youth minister in Bridge City, that church, God used that church to call me into the pastorate. There's no doubt in my mind about it. When I went there, the church had split before I got there. The pastor, they had had a pastor for 18 years who was what in leadership is called laissez-faire. He's very hands-off.
Let the people do.
But the people down there in Bridge City, in that area, is called the Golden Triangle because of all the chemical plants. Some people call it the Rusty Triangle.
Yeah, we've sung in that area.
Okay. Well,
Orange.
they're a lot of them, a lot of middle management, very middle class, upper middle class probably. So that pastor, understanding all that, he let him run the church. He was an excellent preacher. He was a very good pastor. Church grew and thrived under his leadership. And the only reason he left is his dad became ill. And so he got an opportunity to move back to a church that was closer to where his parents were at. And so he left. And I don't know why, but I have seen this now. I'm a kind of a little bit of a study of churches calling pastors. They went from a total laissez-faire style pastor, which worked for them, but there was something there where they were like, man, we really grew under this guy. What if we got one of these guys that come in here and grab it by the horns and really, man, we'll really take off? Well, that's what they did. They went out and got a real hands-on, more of authoritarian type.
Right.
And within about a year and a half, the whole church blew up. It split. Because it went from people who were used to, hey, we're just going to do it. We're just going to take care of it, to the pastor coming in and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. Wait a minute. So it's that church, like I said, prepared me. So when I went there, I was there about a year, and this is when I knew we were in trouble. Okay. Because I have 2 little kids. When we went there, we had our oldest daughter. She was about 6 or 7 months old when we were called to go to Bridge City, and I graduated from seminary. And my wife was 6 months pregnant. They're 14 months apart. So 2 very little children. We go to Bridge City. We're there about a year, and things are looking pretty good. We had a youth camp. We went to Union University in Tennessee, and the pastor's son came forward and accepted Christ. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird because I was pretty sure he was already saved, but he wasn't. And so he got saved. And then in the midst of that, there was some concerns, let's just say. Not long after that, the pastor that was there got caught with the church secretary.
Oh.
Now, I personally believe that was because that it happened. I'm not trying to excuse what they did, but there for about a year or so, because of the church pressure of splitting. And I mean, they called in the mediaries from the Southern Baptist Convention. They came down, stayed with them for 2 weeks, did all kinds of training and preaching and all this, and it still fell apart. But that's when I started having to step up and go into pastoral role a lot. I mean, when that happened, literally for about 2 weeks, I went in my office every day with my head on my desk saying, God, what are you doing in my life here?
Yeah.
Because we lost the music director who had been there for quite a few years, had left a few months before, probably knew something might have been up.
Right.
So when the pastor and the secretary were gone, I was it. I was the only staff member left, and I was a year out of seminary. So
Oh my goodness.
the only thing that saved me is we had some tremendous godly Christian deacons that really supported me, helped me, encouraged me.
Sure.
And otherwise, I don't know what would have happened.
So you're saying that from a very young age, at least pastorally speaking, you had the varnish stripped off pretty fast.
Yeah. I mean, and this is a guy, when I went to seminary, they do a test, a psychological battery thing. Profile, yeah. Okay, so they do this, and they tell you up front, now they don't use this for any kind of, they're not kicking you out or, and they pick 5% randomly to just interview. So they can kind of see different personality types or different. That's a lie. That's just a flat out lie. They got mine and they called me in, and basically what they were like, your background, everything, it just doesn't look like, this is really a good move. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah. So they told me all the thing. We went through the whole test and the personality and the different mindset and things and all this. And my response was, what about the Holy Spirit?
Right.
Can't the Holy Spirit change a person and the things that they've lived through?
This is in seminary.
Yes, this was Southwest.
They're trying to talk you out of
basically, yes. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, which I had a rough growing up. I was raised by a single mother. My mom and my dad divorced when I was about 5 or 6. I was born in, you can't tell by my accent, but I was born in San Diego, California.
No, you can't. You're right. You sound like you belong here.
I get that a lot. Well, I got hanging on my office door a bumper sticker that says I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could.
That's right. Amen.
So, but anyways, just we moved to Texas on a Greyhound bus. My mom's brother moved out here after he got out of the Marine Corps and started a business back in the early 70s when everything was booming.
Yep.
And more or less said to my mom, hey, why don't y'all move out here? So, we lived in a trailer house. She got remarried for a few years. Pretty difficult situation with my mom, in a sense that I even kind of had to go back and apologize to her later. There was some resentment, mainly because, like I graduated from Granbury High School in 1982, and my mom never came to any of my ball games, my track meets, none of that. And when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, it's just like, you just go on and don't worry about it, but there's some resentment building up.
That's right.
But I had to grow up a little before I realized, hey, Mom left. She worked at the nuclear power plant in Glenrose when they were building it. Well, she left probably at 5:45 in the morning. Got home at 6, basically put supper on the table most of the time, and went to bed.
Right.
So she could do it all. I mean, her job at that point was keep a roof over their head and keep them fed. And that was
Keep them alive.
And I don't even know that she could have done that, but her brother helped a lot, my uncle. So anyways, I did go back later and say, Mom, I have to apologize just because kind of had some animosity there or whatever. But now I realize you were doing the best you could.
Yeah.
You know?
You had a lot going on too.
Yeah. So, I think some of that, when that came out in the psychological thing or whatever,
Right.
they picked up on that and they were like, this background's probably not too good.
Isn't it a good thing that they didn't profile Paul?
Oh, yeah, for sure. All the New Testament
Peter?
people. Yeah. I try to tell people, just like, a church that splits. It's not good, but God's in the business of taking something that's not good and making
That's right.
something good out of it.
Yeah.
And so, I have to remind people, there's fights and people get mad in church and leave or whatever. That happened in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Paul and Barnabas got mad, went
Split.
separate ways, but God used it to do more ministry
Right.
and go different directions with it. And so, I'm not saying, we all should try to get along and love each other. But there's times where I think it's better to shake hands and say, I love you, brother, but we need to part ways.
Go with God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I am coming to one of these places in my life where I can't help but think how little I really do understand about the nature of living, about the nature of the church, about the nature of God, about the nature of what it means. Even the Bible, I feel comfortable reading it, and I probably complacent because I've read it so much for my entire life. You get to the point where you can say more of it than you're having to read and really think about, and yet I'm thinking, I really feel like I'm going to feel like a nincompoop at some point. I don't really think I know what God has up his sleeves. I really don't think I understand what tomorrow holds.
Well, and I don't, but I do think there's a reckoning probably coming to the Western church. I don't know what all that looks like, but
Now,
that's where I believe we've got to do a better job in discipling, especially our younger people. The biblical literacy rate is,
plummeting.
oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. I didn't grow up in church, as you probably picked up from my story. I got saved when I was 11, got invited to a vacation Bible school, big proponent of vacation Bible school. Basically, my sister got invited, and here, take Stephen too.
Right.
Got saved, didn't go to church because my parents didn't go to church. Right. And this is one of those deals where you see just God working in my life to bring me where he wanted me to be. But about my 10th grade year, started driving and was at had a 69 Plymouth Roadrunner, by the way, which was totally awesome. But was at the mechanic shop dropping it off for something. And the youth minister at First Baptist Granbury was there picking his car up. And I'm like, I don't really have a ride home. I think I was hoping the mechanic guy would give me a ride home or something. Anyways, he was like, I'll give you a ride home. Well, he was a sports nut. I was a sports nut. Ended up, he took me to his office, visited with me, bought me a Coke. We talked baseball or something. And the next thing I knew, I was going to church by myself every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, Wednesday night. If I wasn't working, I was in church. And that's where you see God working and moving. And an interesting part of that story is you were asking me about the lineage of my name. It's German. I find out later that my great-great-grandfather that came here from Germany came to escape religious persecution and went to seminary. And there's a seminary in Illinois. I guess it was maybe Catholic. I'm not really sure. But it was called the Seminary of the New Blood. And he dropped out.
Wow.
Never went back. And as far as I know, most of my father's side of the family were not churchgoers.
Right.
So when I find that out, I just think it's interesting that then here's God steering my life through all this stuff.
Yeah.
Even the seminary goes, you really shouldn't be here. Looking at your life and all the issues and problems and everything. And I'm thinking, but God wanted somebody from this family
Right.
to go to seminary and become a pastor.
Yeah.
And so, and it's that old, well, if you won't be faithful, I'll wait and I'll get somebody else
Right.
who will, you know.
At some point, I mean, that's the call.
That's the call.
How do we the global C, the global Catholic, little C Catholic Church, how do we correct the biblical literacy that you referred to a minute ago? So we're kind of we're talking about the decline of the Western Church. I don't know where you stand on end times, but it feels like time's short.
I'll know this. I say this a lot from our pulpit. 20 years ago, if you'd have told me all the stuff that's going on in our country
Right.
and in our world would have been happening, I'd have said, you're crazy in 20 years.
Yep.
That should put fear in all of our lives
Right.
of what the next 20 years hold. Now, that's all biblical.
Right.
So we don't live in fear. We live in, okay, let's get busy.
That's it.
Time is short.
Yes.
And we're being shown that. So we should be more. The problem is in the Western church, the established older churches, dare I say, are mostly social grouping. Not always, not every time. There's always some, but I think that's why you see these young guys that get out of seminary and they don't want to go to an older established church. They just say, well, I'm going to start a church.
Right.
You have way more churches starting, and they're growing and way passing up older established churches because they start from ground one saying this is a church. Discipleship is preeminent. And unfortunately, in a lot of churches, that's the pastor's job to mentor, well, he can only do 3 or 4 people in a year, or something.
If you're really ambitious.
Yeah. So, it's trying to get people on board with the idea we've got to do a better job, especially these younger people, knowing what could be coming to where you may not have all of this. You may not have the big sanctuaries and fellowship halls, and
You
it
may not have a building.
may not.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Ministry on the Move. I've been your host, Chris McNeil. If you want to find out more about the McNeils, you can reach me, Chris, at mcneilmusic.com. You can go to our website, mcneilmusic.com, mcneilmusic.tv, themcneilproject.com. Follow us on Facebook at The McNeils. Next time, second part of the interview with Steve Schulte, and it gets better. It's a good interview. It was a lot of fun with him. We look forward to it next time with you. Bye-bye. My neighbors listen to really good music, whether they like it or not.